So about 8 years ago, I was finishing up my undergrad in social work at the University of South Florida. And next to my desk, I had an icon of the Last Judgment, which has Matthew 25 painted in the fringes. And I would be doing my homework, surfing Facebook, different social media sites, back and forth, and looking at this icon of the Last Judgment. And I kept reading. Did you feed the hungry? Did you clothe the naked? Did you visit the prisoners, the widows, the orphans? And I kept thinking about, okay, this is what Christ is going to ask me at the Last Judgment. Do I have an answer? The answer as of 8 years ago was no, I do not have an answer. And I was like, this is not good. I better fix this situation ASAP. Because I do not want to come to the Last Judgment and stand before Christ and say, I didn't do anything that you commanded. You know, I'd like to make at least a show of an attempt to do something good before I die. So I started asking myself, okay, what can I do? I saw Africans online begging all the time, and I'd be like, yeah, I'd love to help you, but I don't know if you're legitimate. Pretty much everybody here has grown up with hearing about the Nigerian scammers and, you know, this fake beggar and that fake beggar. And I was like, you know, I'm a monk and I'm a college student, so that's like double broke, you know. And so what can I really do? How can I help? How can I answer this call? At one point, I had the privilege of coming into contact with some Asian missionaries that were working in Thailand. And in the early 90s, there was this rumor that if you had sex with a virgin, you could cure AIDS. And at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, people were scrambling for all sorts of answers. And in Thailand in particular, and all over Asia, girls were not valued very much. Many times, 7-year-old daughters were being sold for something like a bag of opium. I mean, just absolutely nothing. And then they were being sent to the brothels. And so I had the fortune of running into missionaries that their life was going to the brothels, buying these girls out of prostitution, setting them up in an orphanage, and giving them an opportunity to live life outside of the brothels. And I was like, this is the gospel applied. This is where the rubber meets the road. And it was like, okay, so there is something to this Christianity here. Something beyond, you know, whatever this feeling is that I get from going to church or, you know, whatever cognitive joy I give myself. And so that was one of the things that really kept me close to the church. So fast forward a couple of years, my father found Orthodoxy, and we were able to come into the church. We went to one Vespers, and we knew we were home. There was just no more questions asked. I was like, okay, this is home. 6 years later, or something like that, after going through absolute hell in every way you could possibly imagine, having my dreams smashed, heart broken, I got to Metropolitan Jonah, who started putting me back together, giving me the space to heal, to find who I was, to join his monastery. And let's see, about 2015, as I was finishing my undergrad, I was asking him, you know, okay, what can I do? How can I help? At this point, I had seen one of the African beggars on Facebook had been visited by a Russian missionary. And I saw the article on Ortho Christian. And I was like, oh, great, independent corroboration. I know this person is not a fraud now. And I was like, okay, I can help them. I can feel good about that. With whatever little money I have, I can feel good about helping them. And so I started asking myself, well, what can I do? How can I help? Eventually the idea came to me that I was sitting in front of a very nice computer with a great internet connection. I was like, well, I can tell this story. I can help African missions reach out to those people who have money, who can help the mission go forward, and I can tell their story. Because a lot of priests out there were spending all their time trying to raise money to support their missions and had no time or energy left to actually get out there and spread the gospel, to catechize people, to baptize. You know, to fulfill Matthew 28. You go into all the nations and baptize people in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So I was like, okay, I'm a monk, simple monk, subdeacon. Let me take care of all the nitty-gritty details behind the scenes. And so it was kind of started a process of, okay, what can I actually do? I was like, okay, well, build a website. Well, darn, I don't know how to build websites. This is beyond me. So I went and started going through my Rolodex of friends. Found a lady that I knew that knew how to build websites. So I was like, okay, hey, come help me. Let's do this. And she's like, okay. But I happen to also know this other mission, which is St. Barnabas mission that we have now or today in Kenya. She's like, well, why don't we help them too, in addition to this mission? I was like, okay, we'll do that. And I started talking to the Kenyans and asking them, well, what do I say? And Father Methodius, who many of you know, he came here. He wrote me one day and he's like, you know, Father, you can't tell the African story unless you've been here. The first year I went to Kenya, I was going around the Kibera slums, which is the largest slum in Africa, second largest in the world. It's about 1 million people crammed into approximately a 3 square mile area. When I first got there was no plumbing, no sewage, about 6 toilets for 1 million people. So you can imagine what kind of mess it was. And I started really asking myself, okay, what can I really do to make a difference? Kibera is a confounding place because there's probably 1,000 NGOs working in there, around there. They've been there for decades. But the problem persists. And so this is why, hopefully many of you guys got the link that Father Mark sent out about Poverty Inc. Because there is a really big problem out there that a lot of times what we do out of the goodness of our heart either doesn't really make a difference or it ends up hurting people in the long run. So you have to be very, very conscious of everything that you do. One of the NGOs I saw had decided that the best way they could help, they wanted to target single mothers. And so a bunch of Europeans came in and said, okay, we want to help this population. We want them to become self-sustaining, to be able to support themselves, to lift themselves out of poverty, whatnot. All these people got together and said, okay, well, the best way we can do this is we can teach all these African women how to sew. These beautiful African dresses and purses and blah, blah, blah. And they did. And they spent, I think they said $800,000 to bring a bunch of sewing machines in, teach all these women how to sew these beautiful African dresses and stuff. And they taught a couple hundred women. And they set up a manufacturer, and all of these women were sitting on their hands because they had no market. They could not easily access the international market, and nobody in their neighborhoods in the slum needed or could afford what they produced. So the solution that this NGO came up with, which sounds excellent, I mean, you would think this is how you address poverty. You give people a chance to support themselves and lift themselves up. It didn't work. These women were no better off after the $800,000 or whatever had been spent than they were before. just because they couldn't sell their product. And so this was a very influential moment for me, because I realized that you cannot address African problems from they call white people Mzungus, from a Mzungu perspective. You have to give people the freedom to solve their own problems. Now, from a social work perspective, empowerment is a huge thing. I mean, this was drilled into us during our university time. And so that became a big part of how I see missions. It's about empowering the African people to build their own church and to solve their problems and giving them the tools that they need. So with Orthodox Africa, at some point I came to them and I was like, okay, I think it's right. The best way to address poverty and all of this stuff is to give you a means to generate income, to raise yourself up. I think that part was right. The problem is that the Mzungu picked the commodity to trade in without any real knowledge of what the market in Africa could sustain, what people actually needed. So I started going to, that's St. Barnabas today. But I started going to these missions, and I was like, okay, I want to help you set up an income-generating project, but my only two requirements are that you pick a commodity to trade in that's both affordable and needed by the local population. How do we help get missions back on track and to give people the ability to continue the mission long term, because we all know economies collapse all over the world. You know, there's probably lots of talk about the American economy collapsing, European economies collapsing, and so their donations are down across the board. I mean, compared to the 90s, this is a really bad time to be in the NGO business, the nonprofit business, because people just don't give like they used to. So the answer that I came up with Orthodox Africa, and when I was scrambling towards, and still am, is to take whatever donations I can get, invest them in businesses that can continue to sustain the mission. So if all foreign donations dry up tomorrow, the gospel will continue to be preached. We will still be able to support catechists to go out into the villages. We've been partnered with the Orthodox Christian Youth Network of Uganda, which was a bunch of seminary graduates from the Makarios Free Seminary had got together, and they had seen that the church had not been really spreading, evangelizing, had not been nurturing people in the faith. So about 5 years ago, we started sponsoring youth camps, where we had anywhere between 500 and 1,000 young Orthodox Christians from all over Uganda and Kenya come and be nurtured in the faith, taught, just all sorts of different things. My specialty was talking about the importance of living the sacramental life, about making your entire life a living sacrifice. How in the liturgy, the priest always says, "Thine own of thine own, we offer unto you on behalf of all." Sorry. And for all. And I would try to teach people, this is the importance. We have to, in the liturgy, it's the bread and the wine that the priest offers up to Christ as a living as a sacrifice. But our calling as Christians is to become that sacrifice, so that we can say, in living in the sacramental life, "Thine own of thine own, I offer unto you on behalf of all and for all." And so I started a journey of both on my own side of just trying to learn how to sacrifice my life on behalf of all and for all, in order to surrender my life to Christ and whatever. And I tried to teach other people about this. And I tried to share this, the importance of this, and how this is the root of Orthodox faith. All of our right beliefs, all of our right talk, blah, 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 doesn't matter unless we love, unless we can come to the point where we can offer ourselves to Christ. And so, it was just almost 2 years ago now. I was at a camp in Uganda, and I started having young people coming to me and saying, okay, Father, after all these years, I finally understand the importance of going to confession. Can you hear my confession? I was like, no, I'm a deacon. More people come, oh, Father, I understand the importance of getting married and having the church bless my relationships. Can you marry me? I was like, no, can't do that. I'm a deacon. So this went on for a week or two, and I finally came back to the monastery, and I made the mistake of telling Vladika all of this. So right now, I have got a mission center in Kampala. We've got about an average of we're doing multiple services a week, doing at least 2 or 3 liturgies a week, 2 Vespers a week, and I'm really trying to introduce a strong liturgical life to Africa that has not previously been there. Really trying to inculcate living the sacramental life. So that has become my primary work now. I still have the missions in Kenya. I've got a school in eastern Uganda, and I'm working on bringing in a couple other schools as we speak. One of the problems we have in an impoverished world is that we baptized literally hundreds of kids in the last few years. And many of these kids, we will lose them because we do not have the ability to provide secondary education for them, college education, or even employment. So the Catholics, other Protestant denominations, whatever, will get most of these kids that we baptized. Most of them will disappear. And it's really left me wondering, what good are we really doing, especially if we're not able to, and this is speaking of latent consequences that I mentioned earlier. What are the spiritual consequences of baptizing all these young kids but not being able to foster them and mentor them in the faith? I think the Protestants would use the word discipleship. If I cannot disciple people, what good does it do? And so what we're working on right now is trying to develop secondary education and eventually, hopefully, a college, university, and if nothing else, being able to develop projects that will both support our missions, keep them running locally, and be able to employ our Orthodox Christians so that they will be able to continue to raise their families near the church, and that we can get a loop of discipleship and mentorship that will last throughout the cycles of life. And then, God willing, these hundreds of kids that we baptize every single year will grow up to be pious Orthodox Christians that will spread the faith and pass it on to the next generation. I was right before I left Uganda this time. I went to Kenya and I was talking to a priest who wants to work with Orthodox Africa. And one of the biggest problems we have is single young mothers everywhere. And usually when you have a baby, and I guess it's true here in America too, to a large degree, your education's over. I mean, you kind of enter into this loop of, you're just taking care of your kid. You can't really advance your life. And so one of the things I really want to do is to try to build up a school where we can employ caretakers to take care of these young children and allow their mothers to continue their education and hopefully be able to gain decent employment at some point. And ideally in one of the industries that we are building to support the mission. This is a good time. One of my guys did a little video about the mission center in Kampala. So I'll have Nicholas play the video, and it's just kind of a little bit of a introduction to our mission center. This was one of our first mass baptisms at Lake Victoria. Baptized 33 people in the last year. It's not our facility. We rented this place for the access to the lake. I love doing baptisms in Lake Victoria because it's the source of the Nile, and I get to bless water that millions and millions of people have to use. So I like the macro effect of doing baptisms there. That's my altar under a water tank. I don't have an actual church at the mission center, but I kind of set up under the water tank so when it rains, as long as it doesn't go horizontal, I'm mostly okay. And then we got that kind of tarp that keeps most of the rain off. Those are my young leaders that I'm mentoring to catechize. One of the most important parts, I believe, of mission is to really set up locals to be able to build their church in their own language. Huh? And of course, this is St. John's mission. It's not my mission. I'm just kind of a tool in the toolbox right this moment. This is one of our Western missions. Orthodoxy has not made it to Western Uganda yet. And so we're really started there. Recently we bought this motorcycle to allow the catechist, one of my catechists out there, to go out to the villages and really talk to people about Orthodoxy. And God willing, someday when I get a vehicle that'll handle it, I'll be able to go out there and actually baptize people. But in the meantime, by motorcycle, reaching out to people. That's my mud cathedral. I love it. It's the fanciest church I've got there. It's so nice having a real roof. One of the things we're doing at our mission is there's many kids that cannot afford a basic education. There is no free school. So I had a bunch of street urchins that were always hanging out outside the mission, playing whatever. And last year, I had a 14-year-old boy come who had found a Orthodox donor from Netherlands to support his school. And the donor came to me and said, "Can you please put him through school? I'll pay for it." And I was like, okay. So I got this 14-year-old boy and had to put him in preschool because he had no education whatsoever. And I'd watch him and I was like, man, this has got to stink, being a 14-year-old going to baby class. I mean, I know I would not like that at all. And so I was like, okay, what can I do with these street urchins? I can't give them a full education, but perhaps I can help them be a little bit advanced, so God willing, someday they'll be able to afford going to school. Go back to the slideshow. And they will not be as far behind as Evangelist was when he came. So I hired a teacher who teaches, it's usually between 6 and 13 kids every day, and just kind of the basics. Give them basic arithmetic, reading, writing. I've got approximately 1,000 people in various churches that would love to become Orthodox. They want it. They've been striving for it. They've been reading about it. They've been doing everything they can in imitation of it and just haven't attained it. My Mud Cathedral was the first parish of this group with their leader, Andrew, who contacted me and said, okay, we want to become Orthodox. And to back up, when they first left Roman Catholicism, they were swept up by a fake Orthodox bishop who ordained a whole bunch of them and set up these communities. And they found out that he was fake. And so they've been reaching out to finally enter into the church. So, got a picture of Andrew. Anyways. Their main leader, Andrew, contacted me pretty early on in the mission, and I started catechizing him and his family. After just about a year, I finally baptized him and his family, and he has started helping pass on the catechism that I gave him to all of these communities in western Uganda. You probably all saw during Lent, I got Lented big time. It was definitely the hardest Lent I've ever had. I went out and served liturgy at one of our missions in western Uganda, at St. Andrew's, the Mud Cathedral. Coming back from the liturgy, we had a motorcycle pull in front of our car. One guy was killed instantly, and another guy had major damage and was in the hospital for a long time. I wasn't driving, but being the only white guy there, I stood out. And villages are very close-knit. Everybody knows everybody. And everybody was very angry about their friend dying. And so their gut reaction was to get somebody. That somebody happened to be me, because I stood out. So I had a mob snatch me up. They were screaming to torch the car, to lynch me. And so I eventually, somehow after all this screaming about how they were going to kill me and whatnot, there was some voice that came in and said, convinced them to turn me over to the police instead of killing me. And so eventually, after a lot of screaming, they threw me on the back of a motorcycle, took me to a local hospital, locked me in a closet for a couple hours until the police came. And with the mob out there screaming for my blood all the time, just because they wanted somebody to pay. And so the car was pretty much, we were able to fix it, but a little bit, but then it got wrecked again. Some other drunk driver smashed into it. But that was the toughest Lent of my life, for sure. Continue to pray for us. You guys are one of the biggest reasons that this mission is still going. This parish donates significantly to helping continue the mission work in Uganda. So thank you on behalf of all the Africans, and